What's up, everybody? I am back, and today we're talking about what I learned from my first year in therapy at 21 to 22, and some of the biggest lessons that I've taken away from it. What my therapist said were the most noticeable things that had changed within me, and I guess any tips I have for anyone else considering going or starting. And yeah, let's get into it. So the first thing that sticks out in my mind primarily is this difference between this question of why you're going to therapy. And the reason that I chose to go to therapy was because a lot of the people that I looked up to and the male role models that I had online primarily were discussing going to therapy and making it acceptable to do so. That said, I came with this approach of I'm going to therapy because I want to be better than other people. It was still coming from this superiority complex that I'm very aware that I have. And instead of approaching therapy fundamentally ready to reevaluate deeply held beliefs, values, and ways of behavior that I had, I was going to therapy because going to therapy was cool in a way. Going to therapy was the thing that other guys weren't willing to do, and I was wanting to be better than other guys, so I was gonna go to therapy. And my therapist mentioned this to me around halfway or so through the first year, and she said, yeah, when you first came into this room, I didn't get the sense that you were actually here to fundamentally reevaluate your behavior. It was more so checking the box of, yeah, I go to therapy. Good for me. I'm so cool. I'm so introspective and, humble or emotionally in touch with myself, whatever you want to call it. So that's the first distinction that I would draw, where I feel like now, after a year or so, I am actually going to therapy to fundamentally question my behavior and be ready to change it. Instead of before, it was like I still had this wall of actually changing my behavior, but I wanted to check the box of having gone to therapy so that I could be superior to others who didn't choose to go to therapy. Now, once I changed that approach from being one of going to therapy to check the box to going to therapy to actually go to therapy because I think there's actually not even something wrong with me, but ways in which I could have a better life, both for myself and for others. And I could change my behavior, and I could understand different things about myself to give me a more peaceful, joyful, and loving life. It wasn't an instantaneous thing, but once I started to be going to therapy more for that, my experience in therapy is the first time that I feel like I have truly reevaluated the deeply held beliefs that I have had. And the one that most comes to mind is this belief that emotions are inferior to rationality. I grew up believing, because I was taught, that rationality is king. And if you get emotional, if you're having a discussion and you get emotional, you lose. You're inferior. You've submitted. So I grew up with this idea that, okay, I gotta keep my emotions in check. I need it to be always under the surface. If I feel it coming up, I push it back down again, because emotions are bad. Logic is good. You need to just think through it rationally, don't feel. And that's how you win arguments. You win. I mean, the ironic part is that that's what it mostly has to do with, is winning arguments. And paradoxically, or even ironically, that doesn't necessarily lead to the best relationships. This was one of the biggest struggles that I had in my first, and still to this day, longest relationship, where I was very argumentative and I would love to win. I'd love to get into discussions and win those discussions. My ex said that I would never be able to leave the argument without me having the last word. And that is very deeply tied to rationality and believing that rationality is key. And so this belief that I had around rationality being king and emotions being inferior actually led me to start ruining my relationships, or at least like subtracting from them. So going to therapy, I think that the biggest thing that I've noticed, the biggest change that I've noticed, is not seeing emotions in this negative light. actually understanding that emotions are crucial to someone's well-being and like perfectly, I guess it's antithetical to use the word rational, but intelligent. It can be intelligent. Emotional intelligence is a very real thing. And if you are hyper-rational, chances are you are not emotionally intelligent. And that can lead to a lot of trouble, particularly in relationships and interacting with other people. And truly having other people feel like they have been heard or understood. Because the way that I would go about it is if something didn't make logical sense to me, I would just point it out and be like, you're not being logical. This makes no sense. This is not rational. And for the other person, that would feel like, wow, you just like don't even acknowledge that I'm having an emotional reaction and this is like difficult for me in this way. And you're not able to support me because all you're doing is seeing the lack of logic in it, which is fine because emotions are not supposed to be logical. Emotions require a different kind of taking care of, a different kind of understanding and intelligence. But I feel like I understand this more. I believe that it makes me a much more compassionate person. And compassion and empathy is something that I value a lot more now. And I think it is deeply tied with this emotional intelligence and less priority on rationality. Because when someone is suffering emotionally, if all you're able to see is their lack of logic and judge them for their emotional reaction, you are not capable of being a compassionate and empathetic person, because you are simply pointing out all the ways in which they should not be having the reaction that they are having, instead of simply acknowledging that you are having the reaction that you're having, and I'm going to try to support you through this. I'm going to give you the love and empathy and compassion that you need right now to get through this emotional experience. That's a very different approach from just pointing out the ways in which their emotions do not make sense. And it leads to much better relationships, and the other person feels heard and understood and loved and cared for. And you feel better too, because you know that you were actually there for this other person, and they feel loved and you feel loved in return. It's just a much better ending point for everybody. Now, as far as how you go about cultivating this emotional intelligence, if you want to call it that, not to claim at all that I am the expert. I'm very much in the process of learning, but I have realized that I believe it needs to start with yourself. If you cannot be compassionate towards yourself for having an emotional reaction, for being afraid of something, for being angry, for being in fear, if you're not capable of fully accepting that part of yourself and not judging yourself when you have those experiences, you will definitely not be capable of extending that non-judgment to other people. So I think that is the first step, is becoming aware of when you yourself, when I have an emotional reaction, am I compassionate towards myself? Do I understand myself? Am I understanding of myself? And I've noticed very recently that when I do something wrong, when I feel like I've done something wrong or I messed up in some way, only recently will I be able to actually internally say, that's okay. Like, you're okay, Ryan. You still, yeah, you messed up, but that's fine. Like, I still love you anyways. And because I'm able to do that to myself, I feel like that's what allows me to do it to other people, to be compassionate and loving towards other people, even when they mess up or they're crying or having an emotional freak out, whatever it might be. I don't think that previously I was able to do that to myself. So there's no possible way I could do it to anyone else. Now, as far as any tips or advice I would have for other people or just myself, say a year ago, looking to start therapy, it would be to just be as open as you possibly can, as soon as you can. And not, like, if there is any place in the world that should be a place where you can say whatever you want and not be afraid of judgment from the other person, it should be in therapy. And I feel like I only realized that maybe in the last quarter of my first year. Everything up until that point, I realized that I was still putting everything through a filter, like a mental filter. Before I'd say something, I would imagine how she might respond to it, or how that might make me look stupid or irrational or emotional, all these things that I realized I had this superiority complex around. But then the last third or quarter where I was able to get past that and just speak exactly from the heart without putting anything through any mental filter, that's where I felt that we really started connecting. And she was able to really help me, and I felt like I was really just being genuine, and it was easy, and it was hard but fun, and it was just a much more fruitful and powerful experience. So that would be my advice from the get-go, is try to just remove all those walls, all those filters that you're putting things through. Like, obviously make sure that it's actually a good therapist and you're safe and everything like that. But once you know that, do your best to just let it all out and fully connect, because I definitely kept a wall up for a significant chunk of that first year, and that limited the connection that we could have. But once I became aware of that and I tried to remove that wall, then everything flourished much more. So that would be my primary advice for myself around a year ago about to start therapy. And that is it for this video. It has been 2.5 months or something since I posted one after that whole last fiasco of going viral for the weirdest things and getting a lot of hate, and overall just having a very new experience on this whole YouTube thing. But I'm back now. I intend to keep making more videos, probably, I don't know what, I'm not even gonna make any promises. If you wanna watch other stuff around happiness and well-being, I will link something up here, and I have a whole playlist around happiness and just my general thoughts on how I try to maintain a somewhat happy experience. Check that out if you want. Other than that, mahalo for watching, everyone. Take care, and I'll see you next time.